One more step and you'll regret it, a poor single dad whispered to his daughter's kidnappers, and in that chilling moment they realized too late they weren't facing an ordinary father, but a Marine sniper with a record that could end them all. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked pavement of the rural bus stop. Jack Coleman shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his work boots scuffing against the ground. The smell of motor oil still clung to his calloused hands despite scrubbing them clean before leaving his mechanic shop. His eyes, sharp from years of military training, scanned the horizon where the yellow school bus would appear. A gentle breeze stirred up tiny dust devils, making Jack squint. His weathered face softened as the familiar rumble of the approaching school bus reached his ears. The vehicle's brakes squealed as it came to a stop, and his heart lifted at the sight of Emily's bright face in the window. "Daddy!" Emily bounded down the bus steps, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, brown pigtails swinging with each step. Her smile could light up the darkest room, and Jack felt the day's exhaustion melt away. Just as Emily reached the halfway point between the bus and where Jack stood, two men emerged from behind the weather-beaten bus shelter. The first grabbed Emily's arm, while the second produced a knife that glinted in the harsh sunlight. "Don't move!" the first man growled, his grip tightening on Emily's arm. She let out a frightened whimper that cut straight through Jack's heart. Jack's posture changed instantly. Gone was the tired mechanic. In his place stood a Marine, his muscles coiled and ready. His eyes, previously warm with fatherly love, turned cold and calculating. "We know you got money saved up," the second man said, gesturing with the knife. "We've been watching you fix them fancy cars at your shop." Jack's voice came out low and steady. "One more step and you'll regret it." The men exchanged glances, and the one with the knife laughed. "Yeah? What's a grease monkey gonna do about it?" "Let me tell you exactly what's going to happen," Jack said, his tone eerily calm. "You're standing 4 yards apart. The one holding my daughter has a weak grip on her left arm, favoring his right side, probably an old injury. You're both positioned so the sun's at your backs, thinking it gives you an advantage." The smirks began to fade from their faces. "The knife wielder's stance is amateur. You're holding that blade like you've only seen it done in movies. Your escape vehicle is the blue sedan parked behind the mesquite trees, 50 yards south. License plate starts with TX4. Emily's eyes widened as she watched her father speak, his voice carrying the same steady tone he used when explaining how engines work. "You've got 3 potential escape routes," Jack continued. "The road behind you, the field to your left, or the drainage ditch to your right. But here's what you don't know. I can have both of you on the ground before you take another breath." The man holding Emily shifted uncomfortably. "He's bluffing." "3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, Scout Sniper," Jack said, his eyes never wavering. "I've made shots from 2,000 yards in high winds. Right now you're close enough that I can see the sweat on your foreheads. Want to guess how this ends?" The knife wielder's hand trembled slightly. "You're lying. Your buddy's right shoulder is pressed against my daughter's head. From this distance I could put a round through his collarbone without grazing her skin. That was my specialty. Precision. Making impossible shots to save hostages." Emily stood perfectly still, trusting her father completely. She'd never heard him talk about his time in the Marines before, but something in his voice told her every word was true. "The last time I had a target this close," Jack said, "was in Fallujah, a situation very similar to this one. Want to know how that ended?" The man holding Emily loosened his grip slightly. Jack noticed immediately. "Your partner's losing his nerve," Jack told the knife wielder. "In about 3 seconds, he's going to step back. When he does, his center of gravity will shift to his right leg. That's when you'll realize just how badly you miscalculated." As if on cue, the first man took a small step backward. In one fluid motion, Jack moved. Years of training took over, muscle memory flowing through his body like electricity. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his right hand striking up to disable the knife, while his left arm created a barrier between Emily and her captor. The knife clattered to the ground. Jack's elbow connected with the first man's solar plexus, causing him to release Emily completely. She stumbled forward, and Jack smoothly guided her behind him while maintaining his defensive stance. "Emily," Jack said, his voice gentle but firm. "Walk backward slowly. Don't turn around." She did as she was told, her small feet shuffling in the dust. The two men stood frozen, their advantage completely stripped away. They could see it in Jack's eyes. The years of combat experience, the countless missions, the split-second decisions that meant life or death. "Last chance," Jack said. "Walk away. But remember my face. Remember that the next time you think about threatening someone's child, it might be someone like me you're dealing with." The men backed away slowly, then turned and ran toward their car. Jack remained motionless until the sound of their engine faded into the distance. Only then did he turn to Emily, dropping to one knee and opening his arms. She ran into his embrace, burying her face in his shoulder. "Daddy, I was so scared." "I know, sweetheart," he whispered, holding her tight. "I've got you now. You're safe." As he held his daughter, Jack felt the familiar tension in his muscles, the heightened awareness that came with combat. His senses remained sharp, scanning their surroundings for any additional threats. The tactical mindset he tried so hard to leave behind had surfaced in an instant, as natural as breathing. Emily's small hands clutched at his shirt, and he could feel her tears soaking through the fabric. He stroked her hair gently, trying to push down the warrior instinct still surging through his veins. Right now, she didn't need the Marine sniper. She needed her father. "Let's go home," he said softly, standing up with Emily still in his arms. She wrapped her legs around his waist, clinging to him like she used to when she was younger. Jack carried her to his truck, the familiar weight of his daughter anchoring him to the present, even as his combat-trained muscles remained taut and ready. Police sirens pierced the quiet afternoon air, their wailing growing louder as 3 patrol cars pulled into the bus stop's gravel lot. Red and blue lights bounced off the metal benches and weathered signpost. Jack Coleman sat on a wooden bench, his daughter Emily wrapped tightly in his arms. Her small fingers clutched his oil-stained work shirt as she buried her face against his chest. "You're safe now, sweetheart," Jack murmured, running his hand over her dark hair. He could feel her trembling beginning to subside, but her grip remained tight. Sheriff Dan Martinez approached them, his boots crunching on the gravel. The older man's kind face was etched with concern as he pulled out a small notepad. "Jack, we need to get your statement while it's fresh." Jack nodded, keeping one arm around Emily as he described the incident. His voice remained steady and calm for Emily's sake, but his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, an old habit he couldn't shake. "They came from behind that tree line," Jack explained, gesturing with his free hand. 2 men, both armed. One had a distinctive limp in his right leg. He continued providing precise details about their appearance, movements, and the exact words they'd used. The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly at the level of detail. "That's mighty observant of you, Jack." A black SUV pulled into the lot, and 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They flashed FBI badges at the local officers, who stepped aside to let them through. Jack noticed how they studied him with carefully neutral expressions, taking in every detail of his appearance and demeanor. "Mr. Coleman," the taller agent approached. "I'm Agent Miller with the FBI. We'd like to ask you a few additional questions." Emily's grip tightened on Jack's shirt. He rubbed small circles on her back, feeling her anxiety. "Can this wait? My daughter's been through enough today." Agent Miller's eyes flickered to Emily, then back to Jack. "Of course. We'll be in touch tomorrow." Something in his tone made Jack's neck prickle with unease. The sheriff finished taking their statement and offered to have a patrol car follow them home. Jack accepted, knowing it would make Emily feel safer. As they walked to his old pickup truck, he could feel the FBI agent's eyes following their every move. Later that evening, Jack stood at the kitchen stove, stirring a pot of mac and cheese, Emily's favorite comfort food. She sat at their small kitchen table, her homework spread out before her, but her pencil hadn't moved in several minutes. "Daddy?" Her voice was small but curious. "How did you know all those things about the bad men? You scared them away so easily." Jack's hand stilled on the wooden spoon. He kept his back turned, using the moment to compose his expression. "Just paying attention, sweetie. Like I always tell you, it's important to be aware of your surroundings. But you knew exactly where they would run, and all the places they could hide." Emily's voice held a mix of admiration and confusion. "It was like you were a superhero or something." Jack forced a light chuckle, turning to face her with the pot of mac and cheese. "No superhero, honey. Just a dad who loves his daughter very much." He spooned a generous portion onto her plate, deliberately changing the subject. "How's that math homework coming along?" Emily accepted the deflection, diving into her favorite dinner, but Jack caught her stealing thoughtful glances at him throughout the meal. His past felt like a weight in his chest. The years of training, the missions, the lives he'd taken through his rifle scope. How could he explain any of that to his innocent 10-year-old? After dinner, Jack followed their normal bedtime routine, grateful for the comforting rhythm of it. Emily changed into her favorite pink pajamas with little hearts on them, brushed her teeth, and climbed into bed clutching her worn stuffed rabbit, a gift from her mother before she passed. Jack sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her covers. The soft glow of her butterfly nightlight cast gentle shadows on the walls. Emily's blue eyes, so much like her mother's, looked up at him with complete trust. "Time for our prayer?" she asked, folding her hands on top of her covers. Jack nodded, bowing his head. "Dear Lord," he began softly, "thank you for keeping us safe today. Thank you for protecting Emily and bringing her back to me." His voice caught slightly on the words. "Please watch over us through the night and help us always feel your presence. Amen." "Amen," Emily echoed, then reached up to hug him. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart." Jack kissed her forehead and tucked the covers around her shoulders. "Sweet dreams." He left her door cracked open, just the way she liked it, and walked to the living room window. Pulling back the curtain slightly, he observed two dark sedans parked across the street. Their engines hummed quietly in the night air. After a few minutes, both cars pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the darkness. Morning sunlight streamed through the dusty windows of Coleman's Auto Repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The familiar scent of motor oil and metal hung in the air as Jack Coleman leaned over the open hood of a blue sedan, his weathered hands working methodically on the engine. His shop wasn't much, just 2 service bays and a small office, but it was his, and it kept food on the table for Emily. The bell above the front door chimed. Jack didn't look up, assuming it was Mrs. Henderson coming to check on her car again. "Mr. Coleman?" A firm, authoritative voice cut through the mechanical drone of the shop's overhead fans. Jack straightened, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. A man in a crisp dark suit stood in the doorway, his presence as out of place in the modest repair shop as a penguin in the Texas heat. "Special Agent Miller, FBI." The man held up his credentials. "Mind if we talk?" Jack's jaw tightened. He'd been expecting this since yesterday's incident at the bus stop. "Sure." He gestured toward his small office. "Emily, honey?" He called to his daughter, who was doing homework at the beat-up desk in the corner. "Why don't you go read in the break room for a bit?" Emily gathered her books, casting a curious glance at the FBI agent before disappearing through the side door. Jack watched her go, then followed Miller into the office. "Impressive work yesterday," Miller said, settling into a worn chair. "2 armed men, no casualties. Almost like you've had training." Jack remained standing, arms crossed. "I got lucky." "Lucky?" Miller pulled out a manila folder. 3 tours in Iraq. Marine Scout Sniper. Distinguished service record. He looked up. "That's more than luck, Mr. Coleman." "That was a long time ago." "Was it?" Miller's voice remained neutral. "Your record shows remarkable precision, especially during Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah." Jack's shoulders tensed. "What's your point, Agent Miller? Those weren't ordinary kidnappers yesterday. One had direct ties to the Sinaloa cartel." Miller leaned forward. "Ring any bells?" "I fix cars now," Jack said firmly. "Whatever you're thinking, leave it alone. And leave my daughter out of it." "Unfortunately, Mr. Coleman, they've already involved your daughter." Miller stood. "We believe yesterday's attempt wasn't random. They've been watching you." Jack's hands clenched. "Because of Fallujah?" "Among other operations." Miller handed him a card. "We'll have patrol cars in the area, but you should be vigilant. These people don't forget." The bell chimed again as a customer entered the shop. Jack could hear Emily's voice greeting them cheerfully from the break room. "I'll be in touch," Miller said, heading for the door. He paused. "One more thing. There might be cartel connections we haven't fully mapped yet. Watch your back." Jack followed him out, his mind racing. Near the front counter, Emily had emerged from the break room and was helping Mrs. Henderson fill out a service form. Her face brightened when she saw Jack, but then her expression changed. "Dad?" she asked quietly after Mrs. Henderson left. "What's a cartel?" Jack's heart sank. He knelt down to her level, looking into her worried eyes. "It's nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart. Just some grown-up business Agent Miller needed to discuss. Is it because of the bad men from yesterday? Jack forced a smile. Everything's fine, Emily. I promise. He tapped her nose gently. Now, how about helping me with Mrs. Peterson's oil change? The rest of the day passed in a blur of oil changes, tire rotations, and brake jobs. But Jack's mind kept drifting to Miller's warning. He found himself checking the windows more often, studying every unfamiliar face that walked by the shop. As the Texas sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Jack locked up the shop. Emily waited by his side, her backpack full of completed homework. The parking lot was empty except for their car and the old pickup truck he kept for parts. Jack reached for his keys, then froze. There, carved crude and deep into the driver's side door of his car, were 4 words that made his blood run cold. We remember Fallujah. His hands trembled slightly as he ran his fingers over the jagged letters. Emily tugged at his sleeve. What does it say, Dad? Jack quickly positioned himself between Emily and the car door. Just some scratches, honey. Nothing to worry about. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright over the small Texas town. Jack Coleman stood in front of his bathroom mirror, fumbling with his tie. His calloused fingers, more used to handling wrenches than formal wear, struggled with the knot. Through the open door, he could hear Emily humming as she got ready in her room. Need help with that, Daddy? Emily appeared in the doorway, wearing her favorite yellow dress, her hair neatly braided. Jack's face softened at the sight of her. I think I've got it, sweetie. You look beautiful. The drive to church was quiet, with Emily watching the passing farmland through her window. Jack's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing with thoughts of the FBI agent's visit and that threatening message on his car. He'd cleaned it off before Emily could see it, but the words still burned in his mind. We remember Fallujah. Pastor Linda's church was a modest white building with a worn wooden cross above the entrance. As they pulled into the gravel parking lot, Jack noticed how the morning sun made the stained glass windows glow like jewels. Jack, Emily, Pastor Linda called out from the church steps, her gray hair neat under a simple hat, her smile warm and genuine. I'm so glad you could make it today. Emily ran ahead to give the pastor a hug. Jack followed more slowly, nodding respectfully. Pastor Linda, it's been too long since we've seen you both, she said, placing a gentle hand on Jack's arm. Her eyes, kind but knowing, studied his face. You look tired, Jack. He shrugged, trying to smile. Just busy at the shop. Inside, the church was cool and peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass, creating patches of colored light on the worn wooden pews. Emily slid into a seat near the middle, tugging Jack down beside her. The familiar scent of old hymnals and wood polish surrounded them as other congregation members filtered in. When the organ began to play, Jack watched Emily join in singing with surprising confidence. Her clear voice rose with the others, and for a moment he envied her easy faith. The music washed over him, but couldn't quite reach the dark places in his soul where memories of crosshairs and trigger pulls lived. Pastor Linda took her place at the pulpit, her presence commanding despite her gentle demeanor. Today, she began, we're going to talk about forgiveness. Jack's shoulders tensed. Emily leaned against him, and he forced himself to relax. Forgiveness isn't just about letting go of what others have done to us, Pastor Linda continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the sanctuary. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is ourselves. The words hit Jack like physical blows. His mind flashed to desert landscapes viewed through scope lenses, to decisions made in split seconds that ended lives. Each shot had been justified, necessary. He'd told himself that 1,000 times, but the weight of them still pressed down on his conscience. God's grace is bigger than our mistakes, Pastor Linda said, her eyes seeming to find Jack's. Bigger than our regrets, bigger than our past. Emily squeezed his hand, and Jack realized he'd been holding his breath. He squeezed back, trying to focus on her small fingers in his, rather than the memories threatening to surface. The sermon continued, but Jack's thoughts drifted. He remembered the precision of aligning a shot, the stillness required, the complete focus. He'd been good at his job, too good. Each target had been a threat, each shot protecting his fellow Marines. But now, years later, their faces still haunted him. After the service, Emily joined some other children in the church basement for Sunday school. while Jack lingered in the sanctuary, staring at the cross hanging above the altar. "War leaves deep wounds, Jack." Pastor Linda's voice came from behind him. "Some we can see, others we can't." "I'm fine," he said automatically. She moved to stand beside him. "You're carrying something heavy. I see it in your eyes, especially during the sermon today." Jack's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Pastor, you don't know what I've done." "No," she agreed quietly. "But I know what guilt looks like, and I know that grace is stronger than any sin." Before Jack could respond, Emily's voice called from the doorway. "Daddy, come see what we made in Sunday school." The drive home was quieter than usual. Emily dozed in the passenger seat, clutching a paper dove she'd made in class. Jack's mind kept returning to Pastor Linda's words about forgiveness, about grace. But how could grace cover the precision violence of his past? That night, after tucking Emily in, Jack finally fell into an uneasy sleep. In his dreams, he was back in position, prone on sun-baked earth, rifle steady in his hands. Through his scope, he could see his target moving in the distance. His breathing slowed, finger curling around the trigger, but when the crosshairs settled, it was Emily's face he saw. Jack jerked awake with a gasp, his t-shirt soaked with sweat. The bedroom was dark and quiet except for his ragged breathing. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to erase the image of Emily in his crosshairs, but it lingered like a bitter aftertaste. Rolling out of bed, he moved silently down the hall to Emily's room. She slept peacefully, her paper dove from Sunday school sitting on her bedside table. Jack stood in the doorway, watching her chest rise and fall, trying to slow his racing heart. The Sunday morning sun painted golden streaks across the weathered white clapboard of Pastor Linda's church. Jack Coleman sat in his parked truck, his hands still gripping the steering wheel as he stared at the modest building. Emily was already bouncing with excitement in the passenger seat, her yellow dress matching the cheerful morning. "Come on, Daddy. We don't want to be late," Emily said, tugging at his sleeve. Her smile was bright enough to chase away some of the shadows that had been haunting him since the incident at the bus stop. Jack nodded, managing a small smile for her sake. "All right, sweetheart, let's go." They walked up the gravel path toward the church entrance, where Pastor Linda stood greeting her congregation. Her silver hair caught the morning light, and her warm smile seemed to welcome everyone personally. When she saw Emily and Jack approaching, her face lit up even more. "Emily, Jack, I'm so glad you could make it," Pastor Linda said, opening her arms. Emily rushed forward for a hug, while Jack hung back, offering a polite nod. "Thank you for having us," Jack said quietly, his eyes constantly scanning the surrounding area, an old habit he couldn't shake. Pastor Linda's knowing look told Jack she understood more than she let on. "Everyone's welcome here," she said softly, gesturing them inside. The church interior was simple but welcoming, with worn wooden pews and sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. Emily tugged Jack toward the middle rows, where they settled into a pew. The familiar scent of old hymnals and wood polish filled the air, bringing back memories of his own childhood church visits, before war had changed everything. As the congregation sang hymns, Jack noticed how naturally Emily joined in, her clear voice rising with the others. She seemed so at peace here, so different from the frightened girl at the bus stop just days ago. His throat tightened with emotion as he watched her. Pastor Linda took her place at the pulpit, her presence somehow both gentle and commanding. "Today," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the church, "we're going to talk about forgiveness." Jack's shoulders tensed. Emily leaned against him, and he forced himself to relax. "Forgiveness isn't just about letting go of what others have done to us," Pastor Linda continued, her eyes seeming to find Jack's for a moment. "Sometimes, the hardest person to forgive is ourselves." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. Images flashed through his mind, crosshairs steady on distant targets, the quiet breath before the shot, the knowledge that each pull of the trigger ended a life. He'd been good at his job, too good. The military had called him a hero, but those precision shots still haunted his dreams. "God's grace is bigger than our past." Pastor Linda's voice cut through his thoughts. "No mistake is too great, no burden too heavy for his forgiveness." Emily squeezed his hand, as if sensing his internal struggle. Jack squeezed back, grateful for her presence, but the weight in his chest remained. After the service, they joined the congregation for coffee and cookies in the church basement. Emily quickly found other children her age, leaving Jack standing awkwardly near the refreshment table. "She's a special girl," Pastor Linda said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee. She offered one to Jack, who accepted it with a murmured thanks. "She is," Jack agreed, watching Emily laugh with her new friends. "She deserves better than," he trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Pastor Linda's eyes were kind, but direct. "Better than a father who would do anything to protect her? Who loves her enough to face his own demons for her sake?" Jack's grip tightened on the coffee cup. "You don't know what I've done." "No," she admitted. "But I know what I see now. A man trying his best to be a good father. That counts for something, Jack." The drive home was quiet. Emily tired from the excitement of the morning. She fell asleep almost as soon as they got home, and Jack spent the evening trying to focus on paperwork for the shop, Pastor Linda's words echoing in his mind. When night fell, Jack finally gave up on work and headed to bed. Sleep came reluctantly, and when it did, the dreams followed. He was back in position, prone on a dusty rooftop, his rifle steady in his hands. The familiar weight of his gear, the smell of sun-baked concrete, the absolute focus required for the shot, it all felt real. Through his scope, he could see his target moving through the crowded marketplace. But something was wrong. As the crosshairs settled, the figure turned, and Jack's blood ran cold. It wasn't an enemy combatant in his sights. It was Emily, looking straight at him with trusting eyes. His finger was frozen on the trigger. He couldn't move, couldn't look away. Emily's voice carried impossibly across the distance. "Daddy?" Jack jerked awake with a strangled gasp, his sheets soaked with sweat. His heart hammered against his ribs as he oriented himself in the darkness of his bedroom. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m., its red numbers harsh in the darkness. He sat up, running, shaking hands through his hair. The dream had felt so real. He could still feel the rifle in his hands, still see Emily's face in his crosshairs. His stomach churned with nausea. The house creaked, and Jack's head snapped toward the sound. He held his breath, listening intently, but it was just the normal settling of an old building. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that his past was catching up to them, that his attempts at a normal life had been nothing but a temporary reprieve. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as Emily sat at the breakfast table, her legs swinging beneath her chair. She sprinkled far too many chocolate chips onto her oatmeal, making Jack raise an eyebrow. "Pastor Linda's having a church gathering next week," Emily announced between bites. "Can we make cookies? Please, Daddy?" Her blue eyes sparkled with hope. "She said my chocolate chip cookies from last time were the best she's ever had." Jack managed a small smile, though his mind kept drifting to the carved message on his car. "Sure, sweetheart, we can do that." He took another sip of his black coffee, scanning the street outside their window, an old habit that had become necessary again. "Really?" Emily's face lit up. "Can we go shopping for ingredients now? I want to practice making them perfect." Jack checked his watch. The grocery store would be quiet this early on a Sunday. "All right, let's make a list first." Emily jumped up and grabbed a notepad from the counter, her pencil flying across the paper. "Flour, sugar, butter, vanilla," she muttered to herself. While Emily wrote, Jack slipped his concealed carry holster onto his belt, covering it with his jacket. The weight of the pistol was familiar, comforting. He hadn't carried regularly since leaving the Marines. But now, done! Emily held up her list proudly. "Look, I even drew little pictures next to each thing so we won't forget anything." Jack's throat tightened at her innocence. "That's really good, Em. Go get your shoes on." The local grocery store was only 10 minutes away. Jack drove carefully, checking his mirrors more often than usual. Emily hummed along to the radio, oblivious to her father's tension. Inside the store, Emily grabbed a cart and headed straight for the baking aisle. "We need the good vanilla," she declared. "Pastor Linda says it makes all the difference." Jack followed, staying close. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they moved through the quiet store. A flash of movement caught his eye. A man in a dark jacket at the end of the aisle, pretending to study soup cans. "Hey, Em," Jack said quietly. "Why don't you check if they have those rainbow sprinkles you like?" He pointed toward the opposite end of the aisle. Emily nodded eagerly and skipped away, giving Jack the chance to observe the stranger. The man's posture was too rigid, too aware. When he shifted, his jacket lifted slightly. Just enough for Jack to spot the telltale bulge of a concealed weapon. Jack moved casually toward the shelves. positioning himself between Emily and the stranger. The man glanced his way, then quickly looked down. But Jack had seen enough. The cold calculation in those eyes was familiar. This wasn't a casual shopper. "Emily," Jack called, keeping his voice steady. "Let's get the rest of our ingredients." They moved to the next aisle, but Jack could sense the man following at a distance. Every protective instinct screamed at him to get Emily out, but he couldn't risk leading this threat back home. "Stay right here with the cart," Jack told Emily. "I forgot something. Don't move, okay?" Emily nodded, preoccupied with comparing different types of chocolate chips. Jack doubled back, moving swiftly through the store. He caught up to the stranger near the produce section. "Want to tell me why you're following my daughter and me?" His voice was low, dangerous. The man's hand twitched toward his side, but Jack was faster. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting slightly. Not enough to hurt, just enough to show he could. "You don't want to do this here," Jack whispered. "Too many witnesses, too many cameras. Walk away now, and we both forget this happened." For a moment, the man's face hardened with hatred. Then he yanked his arm free and slipped away through the automatic doors, disappearing into the parking lot. Jack's heart pounded as he returned to Emily, who was still studying cookie ingredients. "Did you find what you needed, Daddy?" "Yeah, baby. Let's check out and head home." They loaded the grocery bags into the truck. Jack drove home, taking a circuitous route, watching for any cars that might be following. Emily chattered about cookie recipes, unaware of her father's growing unease. When they pulled into their driveway, Jack noticed it immediately. The front door was slightly ajar, morning sunlight catching the gap. He had definitely locked it before they left. "Emily, stay in the truck," he ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "Lock the doors. If anyone but me comes near, use the emergency phone like we practiced." Emily's eyes widened with fear, but she nodded bravely. Jack waited until he heard the locks click before moving toward the house. He retrieved his rifle from its locked case in the truck bed, checking it with practiced efficiency. The weight felt grimly familiar in his hands as he approached the door. Every step was silent, each movement precise, muscle memory from years of training taking over. The door hinges didn't creak as he eased it open. Jack cleared each room methodically, just as he had done countless times in distant war zones. The house was empty, but something was wrong. He could feel it. In Emily's room, he found it. Her favorite teddy bear, the one her mother had given her, sat propped against her pillow. Pinned to its chest was a note written in deep red ink that looked disturbingly like blood. "We'll take her again." Jack's hands tightened on his rifle, as cold fury mixed with fear in his chest. He quickly checked the rest of the house again, ensuring no one was lying in wait. Only then did he return to the truck where Emily sat clutching her emergency phone, her face pressed against the window. He forced himself to smile reassuringly as he opened her door. "All clear, sweetheart, but I think we should go visit Pastor Linda for a while. Would you like that?" Emily nodded, still looking scared. "Can we bring the cookie ingredients?" "Of course we can." Jack helped her out of the truck, keeping his body between her and the house. He wouldn't tell her about the note. Wouldn't let her know how close the danger had come to their home. But as he gathered their grocery bags, his mind was already racing, planning their next move. The cartel had found them. They had been in his home, touched his daughter's things. The message was clear. Nowhere was safe anymore. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Jack's living room as Agent Miller stood by the window, his dark suit absorbing the golden light. His face was grim, hands clasped behind his back as he delivered the news that made Jack's blood run cold. "The man you scared off at the bus stop?" Miller's voice was steady, professional. "He's connected to the Los Zetas cartel. And they remember you, Coleman. They remember Fallujah." Jack's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the kitchen where Emily hummed softly, measuring chocolate chips for their baking project. The sound of her innocent activity made the agent's words even more chilling. "That's impossible," Jack said, keeping his voice low. "Those operations were classified. How would they even know?" Miller pulled out a manila folder, spreading photos across the coffee table. "Because the man you killed in Fallujah, their top lieutenant's brother, took them years to trace it back to you, but they're certain now." He tapped one photo showing surveillance images of Jack's shop. "They've been watching you for weeks." Jack's fingers curled into fists. "So, what's the FBI's plan? Use us as bait?" His voice carried an edge that made Miller look up sharply. "Because if that's what you're thinking, We need to draw them out, Miller interrupted. Set up a controlled— No. Jack's response was immediate, final. I won't put Emily at risk. Not for your operation, not for anything. They're coming either way, Coleman. Miller's tone softened slightly. At least with us, you'd have protection. Jack paced the small living room, muscle working in his jaw. The familiar weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders. Not the clean, precise burden of a sniper's mission, but the messy, complicated weight of a father's duty. My only mission now is Emily, he said finally, stopping to face Miller. Everything else, the cartel, Fallujah, all of it, that's the past. I won't let it touch her. Miller sighed, gathering his photos. The past has a way of finding us, whether we want it to or not. He pulled out a card, placing it on the table. When you change your mind, if, Jack corrected, when, Miller insisted, call this number, day or night. He moved toward the door, then paused. They won't stop, Coleman. They're not like those amateur kidnappers. These men. He shook his head. They're hunters, and they're patient. After Miller left, Jack stood at the window, watching the agent's black sedan disappear down the street. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, but all Jack could see were the shadows growing longer, darker. Daddy! Emily's voice pulled him back to the present. The cookies are ready. Jack turned to find her standing in the doorway, flour dusting her cheeks, chocolate smeared on her hands. The sight of her, so innocent, so precious, made his chest ache with fierce protectiveness. Come here, sweetheart, he said softly. Emily ran to him, and he lifted her into his arms, holding her close. She smelled of vanilla and chocolate, of childhood and hope, everything pure that he'd fought to protect as a Marine, everything he'd die protecting now as a father. Is everything okay? She asked, sensing his mood. Was that man from before mad at you? Jack pressed a kiss to her forehead. No, baby, everything's fine. The lie tasted bitter, but he forced a smile. How about we try those cookies? Emily brightened, squirming to be put down. I made them extra chocolatey, just how you like them. Jack watched her skip back to the kitchen, his heart heavy with knowledge he couldn't share. Night was falling outside their windows, darkness seeping into every corner. He moved to the living room window again, studying the empty street with a sniper's trained eye. This was just the beginning, he knew. The cartel wouldn't stop, wouldn't rest until they had their revenge. But neither would he stop, not while Emily needed him. He'd fought in wars before, but this one was personal. This one was for everything that mattered. Standing in the growing darkness, Jack made a silent vow. He would protect Emily, no matter the cost. No matter what shadows from his past came hunting. No matter what price he had to pay. Daddy, they're getting cold. Emily's voice called him back again, and Jack turned from the window. The darkness could wait. For now, there were cookies to eat, and a daughter to hold close while he still could. The morning sun hadn't yet risen when Jack gently shook Emily awake. Her small bedroom was still dark, the only light coming from the hallway nightlight they always kept on. Sweetie, time to get up, Jack whispered, already dressed in his worn jeans and flannel shirt. We need to go on a little trip. Emily rubbed her sleepy eyes, her pink pajamas wrinkled from sleep. Now? But it's still dark outside. I know, honey. Pack your favorite clothes and toys, just what fits in your backpack. Jack's voice was gentle but firm as he helped her sit up. Remember how we practiced? Emily's lower lip trembled as she looked at her room. But what about school? And Sarah's birthday party next week? Jack's heart ached, watching his daughter's eyes fill with tears. He sat on the edge of her bed, pulling her close. The familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo made his throat tight. I know it's hard, sweetheart. Sometimes we have to do difficult things to stay safe. While Emily slowly packed her bag, Jack moved efficiently through the house, grabbing essentials they'd need. Medicines, documents, cash he'd been saving, and his old military gear. His hands worked automatically. Muscle memory from years of rapid deployments taking over. Can I bring Mr. Whiskers? Emily stood in the doorway, clutching her stuffed cat. The toy was worn and patched, a gift from her mother before she passed. Of course you can, Jack managed to smile. Mr. Whiskers is family. They loaded everything into Jack's old blue pickup truck. The vehicle had seen better days, but Jack maintained it meticulously. It was reliable, and right now, that's what they needed most. Emily climbed into the passenger seat. Mr. Whiskers held tight against her chest. Her small face was solemn as she watched their house disappear in the side mirror. "What about Pastor Linda?" Emily asked suddenly. "She'll worry when we're not at church." Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I left her a note. She'll understand." They drove in silence as dawn slowly painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Empty fields stretched out on either side of the highway, morning mist still clinging to the ground. Emily pressed her face against the window, watching her familiar world slip away. After an hour of driving, Jack spotted a small diner just off the highway. The neon open sign buzzed quietly, and a few trucks were parked outside. "How about some breakfast?" Jack asked, trying to keep his voice light. "I bet they have pancakes." Emily nodded, though her usual enthusiasm for pancakes was subdued. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and bacon. An older waitress with kind eyes showed them to a booth away from the windows. Jack's silent nod of thanks, telling her he appreciated the discretion. "Can I have chocolate chip pancakes?" Emily asked quietly, her first real smile of the morning appearing. "Sure can, sweetie." Jack ordered coffee for himself and hot chocolate for Emily. When the waitress left, he reached across the table and took Emily's small hand in his. "Want to hear about the time your mom and I had breakfast in a diner just like this?" Emily's eyes brightened. She loved stories about her mother. "Really?" "It was before you were born," Jack began, his voice soft with memory. "We were driving to visit your grandparents, and your mom insisted we stop at this tiny diner in the middle of nowhere. She ordered chocolate chip pancakes, too." "Just like me." Emily's smile grew wider. "Just like you. And you know what she did? She drew little faces on them with whipped cream, made each pancake into a different expression." Jack demonstrated with his hands, drawing circles in the air. One was happy, one was sad, one was silly. Emily giggled, and the sound warmed Jack's heart. "Did you eat the faces?" "Your mom wouldn't let me until I gave each one a name and a story." Jack chuckled at the memory. She always knew how to make ordinary things special. Their food arrived, steaming and generous. Emily immediately began decorating her pancakes with whipped cream faces, just like in the story. For a moment, watching her concentrate on getting the expressions just right, Jack could almost pretend this was just a normal father-daughter breakfast. The diner's small TV, mounted in the corner, had been playing quietly in the background, mostly morning show chatter and weather reports. But suddenly, the local news cut in with a breaking story. Jack's attention snapped to the screen as images of police cars and crime scene tape filled it. "Authorities are investigating possible cartel-related violence in 3 neighboring counties," the reporter's voice carried across the diner. "Residents are advised to remain vigilant." Jack stood quickly, reaching for the remote on the counter. He switched off the TV, his jaw clenched tight. A few other customers looked up briefly, but soon returned to their meals. Emily had paused mid-bite, her fork hovering above her pancake smile. "Daddy? Just boring grown-up news," Jack said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Finish your breakfast, honey. We've got a long drive ahead." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dirt driveway as Jack's truck pulled up to the Carsons' farmhouse. It was a modest 2-story home with white weathered siding and blue shutters that had seen better days. A wraparound porch hosted a collection of well-loved rocking chairs, and neat rows of vegetables stretched out behind the house. Emily pressed her face against the truck window, taking in the peaceful scene. "It looks like a house from one of my storybooks," she whispered. Jack scanned the property with trained eyes. Good sight lines, multiple exit routes, dense tree coverage to the north. The tactical assessment was automatic, as natural as breathing. But he forced himself to see it through Emily's eyes, too. The cheerful flower beds, the wind chimes dancing in the breeze, the homey curl of smoke from the chimney. The screen door creaked open, and the Carsons emerged onto the porch. Martha Carson, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wore a floral apron dusted with flour. Her husband Thomas stood beside her, tall and lean in overalls, his weathered face creasing into welcome lines. "You must be Jack and Emily," Martha called out, already making her way down the porch steps. "Linda told us to expect you. Come in, come in. I've just pulled a batch of cookies from the oven." Emily looked up at Jack questioningly. He nodded, and she scrambled out of the truck, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Martha enveloped the little girl in a warm hug that smelled of vanilla and comfort. "Thank you for having us," Jack said, shaking Thomas's calloused hand. "We won't stay long. You'll stay as long as you need to," Thomas replied firmly. "The Lord provides, and we share what He gives us." Inside, the house was modest but immaculately kept. Handmade quilts draped the furniture, and family photos covered the walls. The kitchen gleamed with well-used copper pots, and true to Martha's word, the smell of fresh cookies filled the air. "Emily, would you like to help me in the garden?" Martha asked, after they'd settled in with cookies and milk. "I've got some tomatoes that need picking." Emily's face lit up. "Can I, Dad?" Jack hesitated, his protective instincts warring with Emily's obvious delight. "Stay where I can see you from the kitchen window," he finally said. As Emily followed Martha outside, Thomas gestured to the coffee pot on the counter. "Join me for a cup?" Martha's garden's got the best view from the kitchen table. Jack accepted the steaming mug, positioning himself so he could watch Emily through the window. She was already giggling as Martha showed her how to tell which tomatoes were ripe, her small hands carefully cradling each red fruit. "Linda told us a bit about your situation," Thomas said quietly, settling into a chair across from Jack. "Not details, mind you. Just that you and your girl need a safe harbor for a spell." Jack's fingers tightened around the coffee mug. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "Son, trouble comes whether we invite it or not." Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. "The question is how we face it. You're carrying a mighty heavy load there." Through the window, Emily was showing Martha a butterfly that had landed on one of the tomato plants. Her face was alight with wonder, and for a moment, she looked so much like her mother that Jack's chest ached. "I have to protect her," Jack said, his voice rough. "She's all I have left." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's a father's job, right enough. But, you know, there's some burdens too heavy for any man to carry alone." He tapped the worn Bible that sat on the kitchen table. "Sometimes we need to share the weight, with others and with Him." Jack watched as Emily carefully placed tomatoes in Martha's basket, her movements deliberate and proud. "I've done things in the war, things that make it hard to believe I deserve any help, especially from Him." "Grace isn't about deserving, son." Thomas's voice was kind. "It's about accepting. The Lord doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching Emily and Martha move through the garden. The afternoon light softened, and Martha showed Emily how to water the plants, their laughter carrying through the open window. Later, after a dinner of Martha's homemade meatloaf and fresh vegetables from the garden, Emily fell asleep on one of the quilted sofas. Jack carried her up to the guest room, tucking her in as Martha had already turned down the covers. When he came back downstairs, Thomas handed him a cup of tea. "Martha's special blend," he explained. "Helps with sleep." But Jack shook his head, retrieving his rifle from his truck instead. He positioned himself in the living room armchair that gave him the best view of both the front and back of the property. The weight of the rifle was familiar in his hands, almost comforting in its way. "I'll keep watch," he said simply. Thomas and Martha didn't argue, seeming to understand something of what drove him. Martha squeezed his shoulder as she passed, heading up to bed, while Thomas left the kitchen light on, just in case. In the quiet of the night, Jack sat vigilant at the window. The rifle rested across his lap as he watched shadows move across the yard, cataloging each sound. The creak of the house settling, the rustle of wind through the garden, the distant call of a night bird. His body was still, but his mind raced with exit strategies, defensive positions, potential threats. The Carsons' home was peaceful, a glimpse of the normal life he wished he could give Emily. But he knew better than to let his guard down, even here, especially here, where good people could get caught in the crossfire of his past. So he kept his vigil as the house slept around him, unable to find rest himself. The rifle stayed ready in his hands, and his eyes never stopped scanning the darkness beyond the windows. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the sweet scent of wildflowers across the Carsons' property. Jack stood in the kitchen, watching through the window as Mr. Carson showed Emily how to properly hold a fishing rod. Her pink jacket stood out against the misty backdrop of the lake, her excited squeals drifting back to the house. "She's a natural, Mrs." Carson said, placing a thermos of coffee and a small cooler of sandwiches on the counter. "Tom's been waiting for someone to teach fishing to since our grandkids moved out west." Jack nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you for this. For everything." "Go on now." She shooed him toward the door. "They're waiting for you." Jack grabbed the supplies and headed down the worn path to the lake. Emily waved enthusiastically when she spotted him, her ponytail bouncing. "Daddy, Mr. Carson says I might catch a big bass. Is that right?" Jack couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. It had been too long since he'd seen that sparkle in her eyes. The lake stretched out before them, mirror smooth in the early morning light. Mr. Carson had already set up 3 camping chairs and was baiting Emily's hook with practiced ease. "Nothing better than fishing to settle the soul," he said, winking at Jack. They cast their lines into the water, the soft plops creating gentle ripples across the surface. Emily sat between the 2 men, her feet barely touching the ground as she swung them back and forth. "Now remember," Mr. Carson instructed, "patience is key. The fish will come when they're ready." Emily nodded seriously, gripping her rod with determined focus. Jack watched her from the corner of his eye, his heart swelling. These peaceful moments were what he'd always wanted for her, what he'd dreamed of during those long nights in the desert. After about 20 minutes, Emily's line suddenly jerked. "Oh!" she gasped, nearly dropping the rod. "Easy now," Mr. Carson coached. "Pull back slowly, just like I showed you." Emily's tongue stuck out in concentration as she reeled in her first catch. It wasn't much, just a small bluegill, but her face lit up like she'd won an Olympic medal. "Look, Daddy, I did it. That's my girl," Jack said proudly, helping her remove the hook. They took a quick picture before releasing the fish back into the lake. Mr. Carson excused himself to get more bait from his tackle box near the dock, leaving father and daughter alone for a moment. Emily leaned against Jack's arm, still buzzing with excitement. "Dad," she asked softly, "why did you leave the Marines? Was it because of me?" Jack set his rod down, turning to face his daughter. The question had been coming for a while now, he knew. After everything that had happened, she deserved the truth, or at least the version she could understand. "Partly," he admitted, "but mostly because I realized what really mattered in life." He picked up a small stone and tossed it into the lake, watching the ripples spread. "You see, in the Marines, I earned lots of medals and commendations. People called me a hero." Emily listened intently, her big eyes fixed on his face. "But none of those medals meant anything compared to being your dad. When your mom got sick," his voice caught for a moment, "I knew I couldn't be away anymore. Some people find glory in war, but I found it right here, being with you." Emily was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. Then she reached over and took his rough hand in her small one. "I'm glad you came home, Daddy." Jack squeezed her hand gently, fighting back tears. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Mr. Carson returned, and they spent another hour fishing, sharing stories, and enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. Emily caught 2 more fish, each one met with the same enthusiasm as the first. Jack found himself relaxing, almost forgetting why they were really at the Carsons' farm. As the morning grew warmer, they packed up their gear and headed back to the house. Mrs. Carson had fresh lemonade waiting on the porch, and Emily eagerly told her about every detail of their fishing adventure. Jack excused himself to check his phone, which he'd left charging in their room. The screen lit up with one new message from an unknown number. His stomach clenched as he read the words, "You can't hide forever." The peaceful morning suddenly felt very far away. Jack's hand tightened around the phone, his jaw clenched. But when Emily's laughter drifted up from downstairs, he forced himself to take a deep breath. They might not be able to hide forever, but right now, in this moment, his daughter was safe and happy. For now, that had to be enough. The church basement wasn't much to look at, with its plain concrete walls and worn carpet. But Pastor Linda and her volunteers had transformed it into something magical. Streamers in bright pinks and purples hung from the ceiling pipes, and cheerful balloons bobbed in every corner. A hand-painted banner, reading, "Happy Birthday, Emily," stretched across one wall, the letters carefully decorated with glitter. Jack stood near the stairs, his throat tight with emotion as he watched the small group of trusted church members put final touches on the decorations. Mrs. Carson arranged paper plates and plastic forks on a folding table, while her husband hung the last of the streamers. Pastor Linda moved between them all, directing the setup with quiet efficiency. "Jack," Pastor Linda called softly, touching his arm, "Emily will be here with Mrs. Thompson in 5 minutes. Are you ready?" He nodded, unable to speak. The kindness of these people, willing to risk their safety to give his daughter a birthday party, hit him hard. His hands, usually so steady on a rifle, trembled slightly. "Remember," Pastor Linda said. Today isn't about the danger. It's about Emily. The basement door creaked open and Mrs. Thompson's voice drifted down. Watch your step, sweetie. It's a bit dark down here, but why are we going to the basement? Emily's curious voice carried down the stairs. The lights flicked on and everyone called out, "Surprise! Happy birthday!" Emily froze on the bottom step, her eyes wide with wonder. She wore her favorite blue dress, the one that matched her eyes, and Mrs. Thompson had braided her hair with ribbons. For a moment, she looked so much like her mother that Jack's heart ached. "Daddy!" Emily ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "Did you do all this?" Jack smoothed her hair. "Pastor Linda and everyone here helped. They wanted to make your birthday special." Emily looked around at the smiling faces, her own face glowing with joy. "It's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you." She hugged Pastor Linda next, then made her rounds to each person in the room. Mrs. Carson brought out the cake, 11 candles flickering in the basement's dim light. It wasn't fancy, just a simple chocolate cake with white frosting. But Emily's eyes lit up as if it were made of gold. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. Emily closed her eyes tight, thinking hard. Then she opened them, looked straight at Jack, and blew out all the candles in one breath. Everyone clapped and cheered. "What did you wish for?" Mrs. Thompson asked. Emily glanced at her father. "I wished for Daddy to never be sad again." The room went quiet. Jack turned away, blinking hard, his chest so tight he could barely breathe. A warm hand touched his shoulder. Pastor Linda, offering silent support. The party continued with cake and ice cream, simple games, and a few modest gifts. A new coloring book from the Carsons, a pretty hair ribbon from Mrs. Thompson, and a children's Bible from Pastor Linda. Emily treasured each one, hugging them to her chest. Jack watched his daughter laugh and play, surrounded by people who cared about her safety and happiness. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine a future where they didn't have to run, where Emily could have birthday parties with school friends, where the weight of constant vigilance didn't press down on his shoulders. As the party wound down, Emily sat in Jack's lap, tired but happy. She leaned her head against his chest, her new Bible clutched in her hands. "This was the best birthday ever, Daddy." Jack wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the sweet smell of cake and the strawberry shampoo Mrs. Thompson had used. "I love you so much, baby girl." "I love you too," Emily yawned. "Are you still sad?" Jack hugged her tighter. "Not right now. Not with you here." Emily smiled sleepily. "Good. That means my wish is coming true already." The other guests began cleaning up quietly, giving father and daughter their moment. Pastor Linda directed the cleanup with gentle whispers, preserving the peaceful atmosphere. Jack rocked Emily slightly, like he used to when she was smaller. She was getting too big for it now, but neither of them minded. "Emily," he whispered, "I promise you something. No matter what happens, no matter where we go, Daddy won't let go." "Never, ever," she murmured, half asleep. "Never, ever." Jack kissed the top of her head. Through the high basement windows, the last rays of sunset painted the room in soft orange light. Jack noticed movement outside, headlights in the distance, just visible above ground level. They moved slowly past the church, like predators stalking their prey. But for this moment, in this basement, surrounded by good people, Jack held his daughter close and kept his promise. He wouldn't let go. Not now, not ever. The moonlight cast long shadows across the church grounds as the last party guests headed home. Jack stood at the basement window, his trained eyes scanning the darkness. Something felt wrong. The night was too quiet, too still. Emily sat at a table nearby, admiring her birthday cards. Pastor Linda gathered paper plates and cups, humming softly. The peaceful scene made Jack's warrior instinct scream even louder. A twig snapped outside. Jack's head whipped toward the sound. "Everyone down!" he shouted, just as the first bullets shattered the windows. Glass rained down as Jack pulled Emily under a heavy wooden table. Pastor Linda dove behind the refreshment counter. More shots peppered the walls, sending splinters flying. "Back door!" Jack commanded, his voice cutting through Emily's frightened whimpers. "Pastor, take her!" Pastor Linda crawled quickly to them, reaching for Emily's trembling hand. But before they could move, the basement door burst open. Dark figures in tactical gear poured down the stairs. Jack's combat training took over. He flipped the table, creating cover, and tackled the first attacker. His elbow connected with the man's throat, dropping him instantly. A second man swung a knife, but Jack caught the wrist, twisted, and used the attacker's own momentum to slam him into the wall. "Daddy!" Emily screamed as more men flooded in. Jack fought like a man possessed. Each move was precise, lethal, his years of training unleashed to protect his daughter. He disarmed one attacker, used the weapon to disable another, his movements a deadly dance in the chaos. The sound of engines roaring to life outside made his blood run cold. "They're coming around back!" someone shouted. Through the window, Jack spotted Mr. Carson and several other townspeople rushing forward with hunting rifles, trying to defend the church. Shots rang out in the darkness. Jack dropped another attacker with a crushing blow, but there were too many. They seemed to come from everywhere now. The basement had become a war zone of overturned furniture and broken glass. "Run!" he yelled to Pastor Linda and Emily. "Get to the storage room!" They made it halfway across the basement when two men burst through a side door. Before Jack could reach them, they grabbed Emily. Pastor Linda tried to hold on, but one of them struck her, sending her sprawling. "No!" Jack's roar was primal as he fought to reach his daughter. Bodies fell before him as he charged forward, but more attackers held him back. He heard the screech of tires, Emily's terrified screams growing fainter. "Daddy, help!" Jack broke free, leaving unconscious men in his wake as he sprinted up the stairs and out into the night. The van's taillights were already disappearing down the road. He ran after it, heart pounding, legs pumping, but it was no use. The vehicle vanished into the darkness, taking his whole world with it. The sound of combat died away. Flashlights bobbed as townspeople checked on each other, calling out names. Sirens wailed in the distance. Jack stumbled back into the church, his legs giving out. The basement that had held such joy just hours ago was now destroyed. Birthday decorations lay trampled and torn. Emily's new teddy bear sat abandoned in a corner, a silent witness to the violence. He collapsed to his knees beside the altar, his daughter's cries still ringing in his ears. The weight of failure crushed him. All his training, all his strength, and he couldn't keep her safe. Pastor Linda approached quietly, her face bruised but her eyes full of compassion. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Jack," she said softly, "this isn't over. God hasn't abandoned you or Emily. Keep faith." But Jack could only stare at his empty hands, remembering his promise. Daddy won't let go. He had let go, and now his precious Emily was gone. The church basement felt hollow, each echo a reminder of Emily's absence. Jack slumped in a metal folding chair, his daughter's half-eaten birthday cake still on the table before him. Pink frosting roses mocked the violence that had shattered their celebration moments ago. His calloused hands trembled as he touched the small paper plate where Emily had sat, her fork still resting exactly where she'd left it. Pastor Linda's soft footsteps approached, but Jack couldn't bring himself to look up. The weight of failure pressed down on his shoulders like a mountain of stone. She pulled up a chair beside him, close enough to offer comfort but giving him space to breathe. "I should have seen it coming." Jack's voice was raw, barely above a whisper. "All those years as a sniper, all that training." He swept his arm across the table, sending the paper plate flying. "What good was any of it if I couldn't protect my own daughter?" The pastor didn't flinch at his outburst. Instead, she picked up Emily's abandoned birthday crown, its plastic jewels catching the dim light. "Talk to me, Jack. Really talk to me." Jack's chest heaved as he fought for control. The faces of his past began to surface. Young men he'd watched through his scope. Targets eliminated with clinical precision. Every person I killed, every life I took, they're all coming back now, like ghosts demanding payment. His eyes burned with unshed tears. "And they're taking it out on Emily." "The weight you carry," Pastor Linda said softly. "I see it crushing you. You don't understand." Jack stood abruptly, pacing the basement floor like a caged animal. "In Fallujah, there was this kid. Couldn't have been more than 16. Had a bomb vest on. My orders were clear." He pressed his fists against his eyes. "I took the shot. Clean, perfect shot, just like they trained me. But sometimes I still hear his mother screaming." Pastor Linda waited patiently as Jack's steps slowed. When he finally stopped, she spoke with gentle firmness. "You're right. I don't understand the weight of those decisions, but I understand redemption." "Redemption?" Jack's laugh was bitter. There's no redemption for what I've done. Redemption isn't about erasing the past, Jack. Pastor Linda stood, her presence somehow filling the small space with quiet authority. It's about choosing mercy in the present. Each moment, each decision, is a chance to choose differently. Mercy? Jack's voice cracked. They have my little girl. My Emily. She's probably terrified, calling for me. His composure finally broke, and he sank back into the chair, shoulders shaking. Pastor Linda placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Your past made you a warrior, Jack, but it's your love for Emily that makes you a father. Use both. I don't know how. The admission cost him. Each word dragged from deep within. The same skills that made you deadly can be used to protect, to save. Pastor Linda's voice grew stronger. You're not that sniper anymore. You're Emily's father. Let that guide your hands. Jack lifted his head slowly, something shifting in his eyes. He reached for his rifle case beneath the table. He'd brought it to the party, ever vigilant. The familiar weight felt different now as he opened it, methodically checking each component. When I was a sniper, he said, his voice steadier, everything was black and white, target or not. Now. He loaded the magazine with practiced precision. Now I see Emily's face in every child. I can't go back to that cold place. Then don't, Pastor Linda answered simply. Let love guide your precision. Let mercy direct your skill. Jack chambered around, the sound sharp in the quiet basement. His movements were sure now, but different. Not the mechanical routine of a trained killer, but the determined actions of a father. You know where they might have taken her? Pastor Linda asked. There's an old warehouse district south of town. Isolated. Defensible. Jack's tactical mind engaged, but this time tempered by something more. I won't let them turn me back into what I was. Emily deserves better than a killer for a father. He stood, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. The weight felt right now, not a burden of past sins, but a tool to protect what he loved most. His voice was soft but iron-hard as he whispered, I'm coming for you, baby girl. The dim basement lights caught the moisture in his eyes, but his hands were steady. In them, the rifle was no longer just a weapon. It was a father's promise to bring his daughter home. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly as Jack crouched behind a weathered boulder, sweat trickling down his neck. Through his binoculars, he studied the sprawling ranch compound below. The main house sat like a wounded giant, its adobe walls crumbling at the edges. 2 guard towers rose from the corners, their wooden frames bleached gray by years of harsh weather. His trained eyes cataloged every detail. 3 men patrolled the perimeter, 2 with rifles, 1 with a handgun tucked carelessly in his waistband. They moved with the lazy confidence of men who didn't expect trouble. Jack's finger twitched, muscle memory from countless missions urging him to take advantage of their complacency. But this wasn't a military operation. This was about Emily. He shifted position, ignoring the rocks digging into his knees. A hot breeze carried the scent of dust and creosote bush. Through his scope, he counted 4 vehicles parked behind the house, 3 SUVs and a battered pickup truck. The tire tracks in the dirt told him they'd arrived within the last day. Hold on, baby girl, he whispered, his throat tight. Daddy's here. Moving like a shadow, Jack circled the property's edge. His boots made no sound on the sun-baked earth. Every few steps, he stopped to listen, to observe. The old habits came flooding back, checking sight lines, identifying cover, mapping potential escape routes. But now, each tactical assessment was colored by one overwhelming thought. Emily. He spotted a small window on the house's north side, partially covered by a ragged blanket. Something stirred behind it, a tiny movement that made his heart race. Could that be where they were keeping her? The parent in him wanted to rush forward immediately, but the sniper's discipline held him back. Jack found a sheltered spot behind a cluster of scraggly mesquite trees and pulled out his notebook. With quick, precise strokes, he sketched the compound's layout. Each detail could mean the difference between success and failure. Guard positions, blind spots, distances between buildings. His hands moved automatically, years of training taking over. But this time, something was different. In the past, such preparations had been mechanical, emotionless. Now, each mark on the paper was a promise to Emily. Every calculation was weighted with love rather than duty. He paused in his sketching, feeling the familiar weight of guilt pressing down. How many times had he made similar preparations only to end lives instead of saving them? The faces of his past targets flickered through his mind. Young men who might have been fathers, brothers, sons. "Lord," he prayed softly, his rough voice barely a whisper in the hot air. "I know I've done things, terrible things. But please, don't let that darkness touch Emily. Help me find a better way." The prayer felt strange on his lips. How long had it been since he'd really talked to God? Since before his last deployment, at least. Before the missions that haunted his dreams. A movement caught his eye. Another guard emerging from the house, cradling a rifle. Jack's finger instinctively tightened, but he forced himself to relax. The old killer's instincts whispered to him, urging swift and lethal action. It would be so easy to fall back into that cold, precise mindset. "Not this time," he murmured. "I'm not that man anymore." The afternoon sun crept lower, casting long shadows across the ranch. Jack used them for cover as he worked his way to higher ground, testing each step before committing his weight. The ridge overlooking the compound offered the perfect vantage point. Good sight lines, multiple escape routes, enough elevation for clean shots if needed. If needed. The words echoed in his mind as he set up his position. In the past, there would have been no if about it. But Pastor Linda's words came back to him. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but choosing mercy in the present. Jack settled into place, his movements deliberate and focused. He laid out his gear with precise care. Rifle, spare magazine, binoculars. Each item had a specific spot, just as he'd been trained. But now he added something new to his standard kit. Emily's small cross necklace, which he'd found on the church floor after the kidnapping. He placed it where he could see it, a constant reminder of what really mattered. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in fierce oranges and reds. Jack adjusted his scope, checking and rechecking his sightlines. In the gathering dusk, lights began to flicker on in the compound below. Through his scope, he caught glimpses of movement behind windows, shadows passing back and forth. His breathing slowed naturally into the shooter's rhythm, steady, controlled, patient. But this time, each breath carried a prayer instead of a countdown to the kill. As darkness settled over the land, Jack Coleman lay ready on the ridge, his rifle positioned with sniper's precision, his heart filled with a father's love. The old Jack Coleman would have already been counting bodies. This Jack Coleman counted heartbeats instead, each one bringing him closer to his daughter. The rifle in his hands was no longer just a weapon. It was a tool of protection, of rescue, of redemption. Night fell over the ranch like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a chorus of desert sounds. Coyotes calling in the distance, wind whispering through dry grass. Jack remained motionless, his scope trained on the compound below, waiting for the right moment. Not to kill, but to save. The moon cast long shadows across the ranch as Jack moved like a ghost between patches of darkness. His heart thundered in his chest, but his hands remained steady, just as they had during countless missions overseas. The weight of his rifle felt familiar against his shoulder, though this time each movement was guided by love rather than duty. Through his scope, he watched the first guard lean against a fence post, cigarette dangling from his lips. Jack's finger tensed on the trigger, but instead of aiming for center mass, he adjusted slightly. The tranquilizer dart struck true, and the guard slumped silently to the ground. One down. The second guard noticed nothing amiss as he rounded the corner of the barn. Jack tracked his movement, timing each step. Another quiet shot. Another guard down, without bloodshed. The old Jack would have taken kill shots without hesitation, but Emily's face floated in his mind, reminding him that mercy could be as powerful as violence. Moving closer, Jack pressed his back against the barn's rough wooden walls. Voices drifted through the gaps between boards, Spanish mixed with English. Casual conversation masking deadly intent. He counted 4 distinct voices. His hands found the cool metal of the door handle. Inside, the barn smelled of hay and motor oil. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the roof, creating strips of silver light across the dusty floor. Jack's boots made no sound as he crept along the shadows. Years of training kept his breathing steady, though his heart ached at the sight of Emily tied to a chair in the center of the space. 2 men stood near her, weapons held casually. Another sat at a table cleaning his pistol, while the 4th paced near the back door. Emily's head was bowed, but Jack could see she was awake, her small shoulders tense with fear. Pride swelled in his chest. His little girl was being brave. From his position in the darkness, Jack's voice carried across the space with deadly calm. "One more step and you'll regret it." The effect was immediate. The guards froze, heads snapping toward the sound but finding only shadows. Jack's voice had carried so well they couldn't pinpoint his location. He saw their fingers tightening on triggers, eyes wide with sudden fear. "Who's there?" one demanded in heavily accented English. "The last Marine sniper you want to meet," Jack replied, his voice seemingly coming from a different corner now. Emily's head lifted at the sound of his voice, hope lighting her face. The man at the table stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "Coleman, you're supposed to be broken by now." "Sorry to disappoint." Jack's voice was ice. "Let her go, and we can end this quietly." "You killed our brothers in Fallujah," another shouted, gun sweeping the shadows. "We'll make you watch her die." The threat against Emily shattered Jack's last restraint. His first shot took the speaker's gun arm, sending the weapon clattering across the floor. The man howled in pain, but lived. A message sent and received. All hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted, splintering wood and sending hay dust swirling through the moonlight. Jack rolled to a new position, returning controlled bursts of fire. He wouldn't waste bullets or lives, but he wouldn't hesitate to protect Emily. "Daddy!" Emily screamed as one of the men grabbed her chair, trying to drag her toward the door. Jack's world narrowed to that single threat. Another precise shot, and the man stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. Emily's chair tipped, but Jack was already moving. He crossed the space in 3 long strides, catching her before she hit the ground. Bullets whizzed past them as Jack cut Emily's bonds with his combat knife. He pulled her close, shielding her with his body as he returned fire. 2 more shots found their marks, disabling but not killing. The barn echoed with shouts of pain and the metallic smell of gunpowder. "Close your eyes, baby," Jack whispered to Emily as he maneuvered them toward the barn door. She buried her face in his chest, trembling but trusting. Just like her mother, she had steel in her soul. The last guard standing fired wildly in their direction, panic making him sloppy. Jack's return shot caught him in the leg, dropping him to the floor. The barn fell quiet, except for groans of pain and Emily's ragged breathing. Jack kept his rifle ready as he backed toward the exit. Emily held tight against him. The men he'd shot lay wounded but alive, a choice that felt right in his soul. This wasn't Fallujah. This was about getting his daughter home, not adding to the weight of lives taken. "It's okay now," he murmured to Emily. But new shouts from outside told him the fight wasn't over. More cartel members were coming, drawn by the gunfire. Jack's jaw tightened as he prepared for what was coming. The moonlight caught Emily's tears as she looked up at him. "I knew you'd come, Daddy." "Always, baby girl." Jack checked his ammunition and squared his shoulders. "Always." Inside the dimly lit barn, Jack moved with calculated precision. Years of training guided each step as he navigated between wooden support beams and rusted farm equipment. The smell of hay and diesel fuel filled his nostrils, bringing back memories of other missions, other times when life and death balanced on a knife's edge. 2 guards stood near a stack of crates, their weapons held lazily. Jack watched through his scope as they chatted in Spanish, unaware of his presence. His finger rested lightly on the trigger, but he waited. Patience had always been his strength. The first guard moved away, heading toward the barn's entrance. Jack seized the moment, emerging from behind a tractor. He struck the remaining guard with the butt of his rifle, dropping him without a sound. The unconscious man's radio crackled softly. Jack quickly switched it off. Movement caught his eye. A young soldier, barely 18, appeared from behind the crates. The boy's hands trembled as he raised his weapon, eyes wide with fear. Jack recognized that look. He'd seen it in his own reflection decades ago, when he was just a frightened kid in uniform. "Drop it," Jack whispered, keeping his voice steady. "You don't have to die today." The young soldier's finger twitched on the trigger. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Jack could have taken the shot. It would have been easy. But something in the boy's eyes stopped him. "I was like you once," Jack said softly. "Young, scared, Following orders because I thought I had to, but there's always a choice. The boy's weapon wavered. Tears welled in his eyes as conflict played across his face. Go home, Jack urged. Find a better path. This isn't who you have to be. For a moment time stood still. Then the young soldier lowered his gun. Tears streaked down his cheeks as he backed away, then turned and ran into the darkness. Jack watched him go, feeling a weight lift from his heart. A scream shattered the moment. Daddy! Jack spun toward Emily's voice. His heart froze as he saw her struggling in the grip of the cartel leader. The man's face was twisted with cruel satisfaction as he pressed a pistol against Emily's temple. She whimpered, her eyes locked on Jack's. So, the famous sniper shows mercy. The leader sneered, tightening his hold on Emily. How disappointing. The stories they told about you in Fallujah painted quite a different picture. Jack's rifle remained steady, but inside, his mind raced. Emily trembled in the leader's grasp, her small hands clutching at his arm. Jack could see the terror in her eyes, but also complete faith that her daddy would save her. Let her go, Jack commanded. This is between us. The leader laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the barn. Between us? No, this is about making an example, about showing what happens to those who cross us. Your daughter will watch you die. Then she'll grow up knowing her father's weakness killed him. Jack's scope revealed every detail of the scene. The leader's finger tensing on the trigger, Emily's tears, the distance to potential shots. But this wasn't like his military days. This wasn't about completing a mission. This was about saving his little girl. One more step, Jack whispered, his voice carrying clearly in the stillness. And you'll regret it. The leader's eyes widened slightly, recognition flickering across his face. These were the same words Jack had used at the bus stop, the same promise of consequences. But now they carried the weight of a father's love, not just a warrior's threat. Time slowed to a crawl. Jack saw Emily's eyes close, tears streaming down her face. He saw the leader's sneer turn to uncertainty. He saw the minute shift in the man's stance that told him everything he needed to know. Jack's finger squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the barn like thunder. The leader's eyes went wide with shock as he staggered backward, his gun falling harmlessly aside. He collapsed, clutching his shoulder where Jack's bullet had struck with surgical precision. Not a killing shot, but one that ended the threat. Daddy! Emily broke free and ran toward Jack. He caught her in his arms, dropping to his knees as he pulled her close. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing with relief. I've got you, baby girl, Jack whispered, stroking her hair. I've got you. Daddy's here. Flames licked at the wooden beams of the old barn, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Jack Coleman held Emily tight against his chest as he navigated through the smoke and debris. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, face buried in his shoulder. The heat pressed against them like a living thing, hungry and fierce. Keep your eyes closed, sweetheart, Jack murmured, his voice hoarse from the smoke. Emily nodded against him, trembling but brave. Her pigtails were askew, and her favorite blue dress was smudged with dirt. But she was alive. That was all that mattered. The crackle of burning wood filled the air as Jack pushed through the barn's side door. The cool night air hit them like a blessing, and he could hear sirens wailing in the distance. Red and blue lights painted the darkness, bouncing off the desert scrub and weathered fence posts. Jack's military training kicked in as he scanned the perimeter. He wouldn't let his guard down, not even with help arriving. He kept Emily shielded behind a rusty tractor, his body between her and any potential threat. The sound of car doors slamming and shouted orders filled the air as FBI vehicles surrounded the property. Daddy, Emily whispered, her voice small but steady. Are the bad men gone? Jack smoothed her hair back, checking her face for injuries. Yes, baby, they're gone. He found a small scratch on her cheek and his heart clenched, but otherwise she appeared unharmed. Agent Miller's familiar figure emerged from the chaos, flanked by tactical teams who spread out to secure the area. The agent's usual stern expression had been replaced by something that looked almost like respect. He approached slowly, hands visible. Coleman, Miller called out. Areas secure. Medical teams standing by. Jack remained tense, years of combat experience making him wary. But Emily needed to be checked out, and he could feel exhaustion creeping into his bones. He stood carefully, still keeping Emily close. The young one that ran, Jack said, his voice rough. Did you find him? Miller shook his head. No sign of him. But we've got the rest, including their leadership. The cartel connection's been severed. He paused, studying Jack's face. You could have killed them all. Why didn't you? Jack looked down at Emily, who was watching the flames dance across the barn's roof with wide eyes. Because she deserves a father who chooses mercy when he can. Miller nodded slowly, understanding flooding his features. Let's get you both checked out. He waved over the medical team, then added more quietly. Pastor Linda's contacts came through. Called us as soon as they tracked the cartel's location. She's been praying for you both. Emily perked up at the mention of Pastor Linda. Can we see her soon, Daddy? Soon, sweetheart, Jack promised, finally allowing a paramedic to approach. The young woman smiled kindly at Emily, pulling out a blanket and wrapping it around her shoulders. As the medical team worked, checking vital signs and cleaning minor cuts, Jack felt the adrenaline beginning to fade. The weight of everything, the chase, the fight, the choices he'd made, settled over him like a heavy blanket. Emily stayed close, only leaving his side when specifically asked by the paramedics. Miller returned with paperwork in hand. We'll need statements, but it can wait until tomorrow. You did good work here, Coleman. Clean, professional. He hesitated, then added, and merciful. That counts for something. Jack nodded, too tired for words. The fire department had arrived, their hoses making quick work of the barn fire. The night air filled with steam and smoke, creating an otherworldly fog around them. Come on, Miller said, gesturing to a waiting FBI vehicle. We'll get you both somewhere safe for the night. Jack lifted Emily into his arms again, her weight familiar and comforting. She was already half asleep, the excitement and fear of the day catching up with her. As they walked to the vehicle, she stirred slightly. Daddy, she mumbled. Yes, baby? You kept your promise. You didn't let go. Jack's throat tightened as he remembered his words from her birthday party, which felt like a lifetime ago. I never will, Emily. Never. They climbed into the back of the FBI truck, its interior warm and secure. Emily curled up against Jack's side, her breathing evening out into sleep almost immediately. Jack wrapped an arm around her, his own exhaustion finally overwhelming him. As the truck pulled away from the burning barn and the chaos of the scene, Jack allowed himself to relax for the first time in what felt like years. The cartel threat was finished, his daughter was safe, and somehow, through it all, he'd managed to hold on to his humanity. In the darkness of the truck's back seat, father and daughter slept, finally free from the shadows that had chased them for so long. Emily's small hand clutched Jack's shirt, and even in sleep, he kept his protective arm around her, faithful to his promise to never let go. The morning sun painted the small church parking lot in warm golden light as Jack's truck pulled up beside the weathered wooden steps. Emily bounced in her seat, her eyes bright with excitement at seeing familiar faces after their week-long absence. Her ponytail swung as she turned to her father. Look, Daddy, Pastor Linda's waiting for us. Jack smiled, the lines around his eyes softening as he watched Pastor Linda descend the church steps, her arms already opening wide. The past week had been spent in FBI debriefings and quiet healing at a safe location, but now they were finally home. Emily didn't wait for Jack to fully stop the truck. She jumped out and ran straight into Pastor Linda's embrace, nearly knocking the older woman off balance. Jack watched as his daughter buried her face in Pastor Linda's flowered dress, her small shoulders shaking with emotion. You saved us, Emily whispered, her voice muffled. You helped Daddy find me. Pastor Linda stroked Emily's hair, tears glistening in her eyes. God guided us all, sweetheart. We never stopped praying for you. Jack stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel. The morning air was sweet, with the scent of fresh-cut grass and late spring flowers. He noticed how the church grounds had been tidied up after the attack. New window panes gleamed, and fresh paint covered the bullet marks. The Carsons emerged from the church doors, followed by other familiar faces from the congregation. Mrs. Carson carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth, while her husband held what looked like gardening tools. Welcome home, Mr. Carson called out, his weathered face creasing into a warm smile. The house has been waiting for you. Jack swallowed hard, unprepared for the wave of emotion that hit him. These people, this community, had risked everything to protect his family. He'd spent so many years keeping others at a distance, convinced he had to carry his burdens alone. I don't know how to thank you all, Jack managed, his voice rough with gratitude. Mrs. Carson approached, setting down her basket to give him a motherly hug. "You don't have to say a word, dear. We're family now." The basket, Jack discovered, was filled with fresh-baked bread and homemade preserves. The scent reminded him of Sunday mornings from his own childhood, before war and loss had hardened his heart. Other church members gathered around, each bringing small offerings of welcome, casseroles, flowers, even a hand-knitted blanket. Jack watched as Emily moved from person to person, accepting hugs and small gifts with a grace that reminded him of her mother. "The congregation spent yesterday cleaning your house," Pastor Linda said quietly, coming to stand beside Jack. "We wanted everything to be ready for your return." Jack nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He thought of all the nights he'd spent in that house alone with his guilt and memories, pushing away any attempt at friendship or comfort. "I was wrong," he finally said. "About so many things." Pastor Linda touched his arm gently. "God has a way of showing us we're stronger together than apart." Emily skipped back to her father's side, clutching a small potted flower that someone had given her. The purple blooms matched the sparkle in her eyes. "Can we plant this at home, Daddy? Mrs. Carson says it's called a peace lily." "That sounds perfect, sweetheart," Jack replied, ruffling her hair. "We'll give it a special spot in the yard." The group slowly made their way to Jack and Emily's modest house down the street. Jack noticed someone had mowed his lawn and trimmed the hedges. The porch had been swept clean, and a new welcome mat lay at the door. Inside, the house smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh paint. There were new curtains in the windows, and vases of flowers brightened every room. Emily ran from space to space, exclaiming over each thoughtful touch, "Look, Daddy, they fixed my teddy bear." She held up her beloved stuffed animal, now cleaned and sporting careful stitches where it had been damaged during the kidnapping. As the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, the church members gradually said their goodbyes, leaving Jack and Emily with warm hugs and promises to check in soon. Pastor Linda was the last to leave, pausing at the door. "Remember," she said softly, "you're not alone anymore, either of you." After she left, Jack found Emily in the backyard, already searching for the perfect spot for her peace lily. She had changed into her gardening clothes, old jeans, and a t-shirt dotted with flower prints. "How about here, Daddy?" She pointed to a sunny patch near the kitchen window. "That way we can see it every morning at breakfast." Jack retrieved a small shovel from the garage and knelt beside his daughter in the soft earth. Together, they dug a hole just deep enough for the lily's roots. Emily carefully removed the plant from its pot, handling the delicate roots with gentle fingers. "Like this?" she asked, looking up at her father for guidance. "Just like that," Jack confirmed, helping her position the plant. They packed soil around its base, their hands working together in the dirt. As they patted the last of the earth in place, Emily sat back on her heels with a satisfied smile. "Now we have to water it, right?" Jack nodded, watching as she ran to fill her small watering can. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, but its warmth still lingered in the air. He looked at the newly planted flower. Such a small thing, yet so full of promise and new life. Emily returned with the water, carefully pouring it around the lily's base, just as Mrs. Carson had taught her. "There," she said proudly. "Now it can grow strong and beautiful." Jack pulled his daughter close, breathing in the scent of sunshine and garden soil in her hair. The peace lily stood tall in its new home, purple blooms nodding gently in the evening breeze. Morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the small church, casting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. Jack Coleman sat in the front row, his weathered hands clasped around Emily's smaller one. The familiar scent of old hymnals and wooden polish filled the air as Pastor Linda's gentle voice carried through the quiet sanctuary. "Our scars tell stories," Pastor Linda said, her eyes meeting Jack's for a moment. "Not just of pain, but of healing. Each mark reminds us that we survived, that God carried us through our darkest moments." Emily leaned against her father's shoulder, her dark hair falling across her face. Jack gently tucked it behind her ear, remembering how close he'd come to losing her. The congregation sat in respectful silence, many of them having played their own parts in protecting his daughter. "When we bear our scars with grace," Pastor Linda continued, her voice warm and steady, "we show others that hope exists even in the darkest places. That redemption isn't just possible, it's promised." Jack felt Emily squeeze his hand. He squeezed back, no longer ashamed of the tears that threatened to spill from his eyes. The hard shell he'd built around himself over years of military service had cracked, letting in light and warmth he'd forgotten existed. Mrs. Carson, sitting behind them, reached forward and patted Jack's shoulder. Her husband nodded solemnly, both of them having sheltered Jack and Emily during their darkest hours. The simple gesture spoke volumes about the community that had embraced them. In Psalm 34-18, we're told that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Pastor Linda's words seemed to wrap around Jack like a warm blanket. Sometimes, that closeness comes through the people he puts in our path. Emily looked up at her father, her eyes bright with understanding beyond her years. Jack remembered her birthday wish in the church basement, for Daddy to never be sad again. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. After the final hymn, the congregation filtered out into the sunny morning. Jack and Emily stayed behind, waiting, as Pastor Linda gathered her notes from the pulpit. She joined them in the front pew, her presence bringing a sense of peace Jack hadn't known he was missing. "Coffee?" she asked simply, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. They moved to the church kitchen, where the old percolator bubbled cheerfully. Emily helped herself to a cookie from the plate Mrs. Carson had left after Sunday school, while Jack and Pastor Linda settled at the small table by the window. "You're different today," Pastor Linda observed, stirring cream into her coffee. "More at peace." Jack nodded, watching Emily arrange her cookie crumbs into a tiny heart shape. "I thought being strong meant being alone," he admitted, "carrying everything myself. And now?" Pastor Linda's question hung in the air, gentle but purposeful. "Now I know better." Jack's voice was soft but sure. He met Pastor Linda's gaze, seeing in it something that made his heart skip a beat. Understanding, acceptance, and maybe something more. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Pastor Linda's hand rested on the table, close to his. Jack found himself wanting to reach for it, to bridge that small gap. Emily's voice broke the moment. "Can we go home and see if the butterflies are in the garden?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. "Please, Daddy?" Jack chuckled, the sound coming easier now than it had in years. "Sure, baby girl." He stood, gathering their things. To Pastor Linda, he added, "Thank you for everything." Her smile was like sunshine. "See you Wednesday for Bible study?" "We'll be here," Jack promised, and he meant it. The drive home was peaceful, Emily chattering about Sunday school and the craft project they'd started. Jack listened, marveling at how normal it felt. This simple act of being father and daughter, without fear shadowing every moment. At home, Emily ran straight for the small garden they'd planted. The flowers were just beginning to bloom, attracting butterflies that danced in the warm air. Jack watched from the porch as she tried to follow their erratic flight patterns, her laughter carrying on the breeze. The sight brought words to his lips, different now from when he'd first whispered them in desperate prayer during their ordeal. "Daddy won't let go," he murmured, watching his daughter chase butterflies in the yard. This time, the words weren't a shield against danger or a promise of protection. They were a commitment to this new life they'd found, one filled with grace, love, and the kind of redemption he'd never thought possible. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Coleman, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.